My name is Elena Harper. I'm 34 years old, and for the last 8 years I've built something beautiful from the ground up, literally. I own Harper & Bloom, a boutique event design studio in Asheville, North Carolina. We take ordinary backyards, old mountain barns, and quiet forest clearings and turn them into living works of art filled with flowers, soft lighting, and textures that stay with people long after the event ends. But on this particular Mother's Day, none of that mattered to the woman who gave birth to me. At 11:47 a.m., while I was unloading 3 vans packed with blush peonies, white lilacs, and fresh eucalyptus for a vow renewal ceremony, every phone in my grandmother's garden started buzzing at the same time. 52 relatives, 1 family group chat, 1 attachment. A professionally formatted invoice from Marlene Harper Reed. Total due, $425,000. Subject line, the cost of raising a disappointment. The backyard went completely silent except for the hummingbirds darting between the lavender bushes and the distant sound of the creek running behind the house. All eyes slowly turned toward me. Here's what none of them knew. The woman now demanding I pay her back for raising me didn't actually raise me for the first 6 years of my life. My grandmother Ruth did. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't even raise my voice. I simply wiped the pollen from my hands, picked up my phone, and sent one single photograph into that group chat. By sunrise the next morning, 51 people had blocked my mother. The 52nd was Grandma Ruth. And what she chose to do instead of blocking her was something far more final, far more devastating, and far more lasting. Welcome to the channel, friends. If you're new here, I tell the kind of real-life stories that don't need dramatic music or raised voices, just the quiet, powerful truth finally stepping into the light. These are stories about family, boundaries, and the courage it takes to stop carrying someone else's lies. If this already has you leaning in, I'd love for you to hit that like button and subscribe. And if you've ever felt like the useful but unwanted child in your own family, drop a little sprout in the comments right now. I read every single one, and I promise you're not alone. Let me take you back to that warm May afternoon in Asheville. The Blue Ridge Mountains were wrapped in their softest spring green. Dogwood trees bloomed like pink clouds against the sky, and the air carried that sweet, almost rainy scent that only the mountains seemed to know. I had spent the entire night before arranging centerpieces, my hands still gently stained with soft green from the stems. I love what I do. It's not just flowers for me, it's creating moments that people feel deep in their bones. Last year my studio cleared more revenue than my mother's real estate brokerage in Charlotte. But in Marlene's version of reality, I'm still the girl who dropped out of design school, still the disappointment, still the one who never quite measured up. I pulled into Grandma Ruth's long gravel driveway that day with my arms full of fresh floral arrangements and a lemon blueberry cake I'd baked at 4 in the morning. It was the same recipe Ruth had taught me when I was barely tall enough to stand on a stool in her kitchen, my little hands covered in flour. She met me at the screen door, 83 years young, silver hair pulled into a loose braid, wearing that faded denim apron that still smelled like lavender and rosemary from her garden. She pulled me into one of those hugs that feels like coming home, steady, warm, safe. "You didn't have to do all this, baby," she whispered against my hair. "I wanted to," I answered softly, and I meant it with everything in me. Inside the garden, the family was already gathering under the big oak tree. String lights I had helped hang last summer glowed gently in the daylight. Aunt Carla was setting out pitchers of sweet tea. Uncle Marcus stood at the grill, flipping burgers and laughing with the cousins. Then I heard my mother's voice carrying from the porch, loud enough, practiced, and perfectly pitched to reach the right ears. "I've done everything for that girl, everything. And what do I get in return? Radio silence unless she needs something for her little flower business." I stopped at the edge of the wooden deck. Ruth's hand found mine and gave it one gentle squeeze. She knew the truth. She had lived every single day of it. For weeks leading up to Mother's Day, my mother had been quietly working the family phone tree and the group chat. Subtle comments, heavy sighs. "Elena never visits. Elena hasn't helped with Connor's graduate school expenses. I sacrificed my best years for her." By the time we all sat down for lunch, the story was already written. I was the ungrateful daughter, the college dropout, the family disappointment. And then every phone buzzed at once. I opened the message with the entire family watching. It was beautifully designed, her branding colors, clean layout, perfectly itemized like a professional financial statement. Prenatal care and delivery, $12,000. Ages 6, $68,000. School years, activities, and emotional support, $145,000. Years I gave up my own dreams for you, $110,000. 34 years of emotional labor, $90,000. At the very bottom, in bold red text, pay what you owe or finally admit to this entire family what you've always been, a costly mistake I never should have made. The garden grew so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. My mother sat across from me, legs elegantly crossed, a glass of chilled white wine in her hand, looking every bit like a woman who had just delivered a perfect closing argument. She had billed me for the years she was completely absent, the years she left me on Ruth's porch with nothing but a short note and a half-empty diaper bag. I stared at the line, ages out 6, $68,000, and felt something deep inside me shift. Not hot anger, not tears, just a calm, crystal-clear certainty. I had been preparing for this moment for years, not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood I no longer owed anyone my silence. I didn't argue with the numbers. I simply opened my phone, went to a private folder I had titled Ruth's Proof, and selected one single photograph. It was taken right here on this porch on Mother's Day, 1994. I was 2 years old, wearing a little yellow sundress Ruth had sewn by hand. She was holding me on her hip, both of us laughing at something just off camera. The mountains stretched behind us, soft and blue. There was no Marlene anywhere in the frame. I typed one quiet line underneath the photo. Happy Mother's Day to the woman who actually showed up. Then I hit send. The phones lit up across the garden like fireflies at dusk. What happened in the next 40 minutes was only the beginning. But the real turning point, the moment everything truly changed, came the following day when Grandma Ruth made her move. I pulled into Grandma Ruth's long gravel driveway that warm May afternoon with my arms full of fresh floral arrangements and a lemon blueberry cake I had baked at 4 in the morning. The same recipe Ruth taught me when I was barely tall enough to see over the countertop, standing on a wooden stool with my little hands covered in flour and her patient voice guiding me. She met me at the screen door like she always does, 83 years young, silver hair in a loose braid, wearing that faded denim apron that still carried the scent of lavender and rosemary from her garden. She pulled me into one of those hugs that feels like coming home, steady, warm, the kind of hug that says you are safe here without needing any words. You didn't have to do all this, baby, she whispered against my hair. I wanted to, I answered softly, and I meant it with my whole heart. These moments with her have always been my anchor. Inside the garden, the family was already gathering under the big oak tree. String lights I had helped hang last summer glowed gently even in daylight. Aunt Carla was setting out pitchers of sweet tea. Uncle Marcus stood at the grill, flipping burgers and laughing with the cousins. The air smelled like charcoal, blooming dogwoods and mountain spring. Everything felt almost perfect until I heard my mother's voice carrying from the porch, loud enough, practiced, and perfectly pitched to reach the right ears. I've done everything for that girl, everything, and what do I get in return? Radio silence unless she needs something for her little flower business. I stopped at the edge of the wooden deck, the cake platter suddenly heavier in my hands. Ruth's hand found mine and gave it one gentle squeeze. She knew, she had lived every single day of the real story. For weeks leading up to Mother's Day, my mother Marlene had been quietly working the family phone tree in the group chat. Subtle comments dropped here and there. Heavy sighs during calls. Elena never visits. Elena hasn't helped with Connor's graduate school expenses. I sacrificed my best years for her and got nothing back. By the time we all sat down for lunch, the story was already written in everyone's minds. I was the ungrateful daughter, the one who dropped out of design school at Savannah College of Art and Design. The family disappointment who chose to take care of an old woman instead of chasing her own dreams. What they didn't know, what they had never been told, was that when I was just 4 months old, my mother left me on Ruth's porch with nothing but a short handwritten note and a half-empty diaper bag. She said she couldn't do this anymore. She said I was too much. She disappeared for 6 full years while she built a new life, a new marriage, and a new child, my half-brother Connor, the golden boy who could do no wrong. Ruth raised me during those years. She was the one who rocked me through teething nights, taught me to read using garden seed packets, sewed my first school dresses, and held me when I cried for a mother who wasn't there. She was 50 years old at the time, already a widow, living on a fixed income, but she never once made me feel like a burden. I carried that truth quietly for decades. I didn't want to tear the family apart. I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed respectful enough, and succeeded on my own terms, maybe the lie would eventually fade. But lies like that don't fade. They grow stronger with time, especially when the person telling them is as skilled as Marlene. She's intelligent, charming when she wants to be, and incredibly strategic. A successful real estate agent who knows exactly how to frame a narrative so that she always comes out as the selfless hero. And for 34 years that narrative had been, I sacrificed everything for Elena and she's thrown it all away. As we settled around the long table under the oak tree, the tension was already thick. My half-brother Connor, 28 and freshly accepted into a prestigious MBA program, sat beside Marlene like her prized trophy. He gave me a polite nod, the kind you give to a distant relative you barely know. Then every phone in the garden buzzed at the exact same moment. I felt my phone vibrate in my back pocket, 52 devices lighting up simultaneously. The sound was almost musical, until I opened the message. It was a professionally designed invoice, complete with her company logo, clean serif fonts, and perfectly itemized lines. Prenatal care and delivery, $12,000. Infant and toddler care, ages 6, $68,000. School years, activities, and emotional support, $145,000. Years I gave up my own dreams for you, $110,000. 34 years of emotional labor, $90,000. Total due in $25,000. At the bottom in bold red text that felt like a slap. Pay what you owe or finally admit to this entire family what you've always been, a costly mistake I never should have made. The garden grew so quiet I could hear individual bees working the lavender bushes nearby. My mother sat across from me, legs elegantly crossed, a glass of chilled white wine in her manicured hand, looking every bit like a woman who had just delivered a flawless closing argument in court. She had billed me for the years she was completely absent, the years Ruth had carried me when she chose not to. I stared at that invoice and felt something deep inside me shift, not explosive anger, not tears, just a calm, crystal-clear certainty that had been building for years. This moment had been coming for a long time. I didn't argue the numbers out loud, not yet. Instead, I simply opened my phone, went to a private folder I had titled Ruth's Proof, and selected one single photograph. That single photograph I chose wasn't just an old image, it was proof. Taken on this very porch in the spring of 1994, I was 2 years old, wearing a soft yellow sundress Grandma Ruth had sewn by hand on her old Singer machine. She held me on her hip, both of us laughing at a butterfly that had landed on the railing. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched behind us in soft blues and greens. There was no sign of Marlene anywhere in the frame because she had already been gone for over a year at that point. I hit send on the group chat and set my phone face down on the table. The reactions started immediately, but my mind had already drifted back to those early years, the ones Marlene had just tried to claim as her own sacrifice. Ruth didn't just take me in, she chose me when she didn't have to. At 50 years old, recently widowed, living on a modest pension in this same mountain house, she could have said no. She could have called social services or reached out to distant relatives. Instead, she carried me inside that day, warmed a bottle, and never looked back. I remember the way her hands felt, strong but gentle, always smelling faintly of rosemary from the garden. She taught me to read before kindergarten, using the labels on canning jars and seed packets, because picture books were a luxury we couldn't always afford. Words are everywhere, Elena, she'd say, pointing to a tomato can. You just have to look for them. Those simple lessons planted something deep in me, a love for beauty in ordinary things that later became the heart of my event design business. Nights were the hardest. I would wake up crying for a mother I barely remembered, and Ruth would pull me into her bed, humming old hymns until I fell back asleep. She never complained, not once. Even when her arthritis made it painful to rock me for hours, she did it anyway. By the time I was 4, I was helping in her garden every morning. She taught me the names of flowers, how to read the soil, and how to arrange blooms so they looked like they had grown there naturally. Those mornings in the dirt with her are some of my happiest memories. While other kids had playgrounds and cartoons, I had Ruth's stories about her own mother, about resilience, and about choosing to show up even when life gets heavy. When Marlene finally returned when I was 6.5, it wasn't a joyful reunion. She showed up in a new car with a new husband and a new baby on the way, Connor. She acted like the past 6 years had been a short business trip. I needed time to get my life together, she told Ruth, as if leaving your baby on a porch was just a minor inconvenience. Ruth didn't fight her. She simply asked for visitation rights in writing and made sure I understood I always had a home with her. That quiet strength shaped me more than any dramatic confrontation ever could. I went to live primarily with Marlene after that, but every weekend, every school break, and every time things got difficult at home, I returned to Ruth's house. She was my safe place. When Marlene criticized my artsy interests and pushed me toward more practical careers like business or law, Ruth encouraged me to follow my eye for beauty. When I struggled in school because I carried the quiet anxiety of being the unwanted child, Ruth stayed up late helping me with homework and reminding me that my worth wasn't measured by anyone else's approval. Those years built the foundation of who I am. Harper and Bloom didn't come from ambition alone, it came from the lessons Ruth taught me about turning simple things into something meaningful. My attention to detail, my ability to create emotional spaces for people, my patience with difficult clients, all of it traces back to the woman who raised me when no one else would. As I sat there at the family table watching my mother smile confidently after dropping that invoice, I realized how deeply her lie had infected the family narrative. Most of them didn't know the real story. They only knew Marlene's version. The selfless single mother who sacrificed everything while her daughter threw it away by dropping out of college to play with flowers and take care of an old woman. They didn't know that dropping out of SCAD was one of the hardest but clearest decisions I've ever made. When Ruth had her first major stroke 6 years ago, I left my program without hesitation. Someone had to be there for the woman who had been there for me. Marlene certainly wasn't stepping up. She sent flowers and a card, then continued her life in Charlotte. Ruth recovered, but it changed things. I moved back to Asheville full-time, started my business from her kitchen table, and slowly built something sustainable. Every major milestone in my studio, the first big wedding, the features in local magazines, the moment we out-earned Marlene's brokerage, I celebrated with Ruth first. She never asked for credit, she never kept score. That's what real love looks like. But love like that also gives you clarity when someone tries to rewrite history. I looked across the table at Marlene, who was now explaining to Aunt Carla how difficult I had always been. Her voice was smooth, reasonable, the voice of a woman who truly believed her own story after telling it for so long. That's when the real weight of what she had done settled over me. She hadn't just sent a bill, she had tried to monetize the love Ruth gave freely. She had tried to turn my grandmother's quiet sacrifice into her own financial loss. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. The family was still staring at their phones, rereading the invoice, some shaking their heads, others glancing at me with that familiar mix of pity and judgment. The lie had been living here for decades. Today it was finally meeting the truth. But I still had no idea that the most powerful response wouldn't come from me at all. It would come from Grandma Ruth the very next day. Those years after Marlene came back were a strange kind of balancing act. On the surface, I lived with her and her new family in Charlotte. I went to school, did my homework, attended the activities she approved of, but my real home, my real peace was always 2 hours away in the mountains with Ruth. Every Friday afternoon I'd pack a small bag and count down the miles until I saw that familiar gravel driveway and the screen door that always creaked in the exact same way. Marlene never liked it. She called it divided loyalty. She would say things like, "I'm your mother, Elena, not some old woman in the hills." But she never understood that motherhood isn't just about biology or a signature on a birth certificate. It's about who shows up when the nights are long and the world feels too big for a little girl. Over time, the resentment grew quietly, like moss on the north side of a tree. Marlene would compare me to Connor constantly. He was athletic, outgoing, followed every plan she laid out. I was the quiet one who preferred sketching flowers in my notebook and helping Ruth can tomatoes in the summer. She saw my sensitivity as weakness, my creativity as impractical. Every time I chose to spend a holiday with Ruth instead of joining the family beach trip, it became another mark against me in her invisible ledger. I learned to stay quiet. I learned to smile politely when she introduced me at parties as my daughter who wants to play with flowers instead of getting a real degree. I built walls, not out of anger but out of protection. Because every time I tried to gently remind her of the truth, that she had left me for 6 years, she would twist it. I was young and overwhelmed. I came back, didn't I? Most women in my situation wouldn't have. She always made herself the hero of her own story, even when the facts didn't line up. Ruth never pushed me to fight her. She would simply say, "Baby, some people need to believe their own story to survive it. Our job is to live ours with quiet dignity." That advice saved me. It kept me from becoming bitter. Instead, I poured everything into my studies and later into my work. When I got accepted into SCAD, Marlene acted proud in public but privately warned me it was a waste of money. When Ruth had her stroke and I made the decision to leave school and come home, Marlene called it throwing your future away for sentimentality. That was the moment the quiet resentment inside me began turning into something clearer, a deep, unshakable knowing of who I really was and who had actually raised me. I moved back to Asheville permanently. I started Harper and Bloom from Ruth's kitchen table with nothing but a second-hand laptop, some thrift store vases, and a lot of hope. The first few years were hard. Clients were few, money was tight, and there were nights I questioned everything. But Ruth was there, just like always. She would sit with me at the table, reviewing invoices in her careful bookkeeper handwriting, reminding me that real success isn't loud, it's steady. Meanwhile, Marlene's life looked perfect from the outside. Successful real estate career, big house in Charlotte, Connor excelling in everything. She would post family photos on social media, the four of them smiling on vacations I was never invited to. Every now and then she'd send me a message asking for a small favor, usually money or help with some event. I helped when I could, not because I owed her, but because I still held on to a small hope that one day she might see me clearly. That hope faded over time, especially when I started succeeding. When my studio landed its first major mountain wedding feature in a regional magazine, Marlene's comment was, "Nice hobby, but when are you going to get a real job?" When my revenue surpassed hers last year, she changed the subject and started talking about Connor's latest achievements. The resentment wasn't explosive, it was a slow burn, the kind that teaches you boundaries without you even realizing it. I stopped explaining myself, I stopped seeking her approval. I focused on building a life rooted in the values Ruth taught me: integrity, beauty, and simplicity, and showing up for the people who show up for you. By the time Mother's Day arrived this year, I had been sending Ruth money quietly for years, for her medical bills, home repairs, and the new greenhouse she dreamed about. I never told the family. I didn't want it turned into ammunition. I just did it because love isn't a transaction. Ruth had given me her best years when I had nothing. The least I could do was make sure her later years were comfortable. As I sat at that family table watching Marlene smile after sending her $425,000 invoice, I realized how calculated this all was. She wasn't just angry, she needed the money. Connor's MBA program, the upcoming wedding she was planning for him, the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to, it was all getting expensive. And in her mind, I was the one who owed her for the version of motherhood she had sold to everyone for decades. She had spent years building this narrative that I was the costly disappointment. Now she was trying to cash in on it. But here's what she didn't count on. I had stopped being the scared little girl who needed her approval a long time ago. I had become a woman who understood exactly where her worth came from. And I was ready, calmly, clearly, and without drama, to stop carrying her lie. The family was still scrolling through the invoice, murmuring, glancing between us. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked like they were seeing the cracks for the first time. The lie that had lived comfortably in our family for 34 years was finally starting to meet the light of day. But even then, I had no idea that the most powerful voice in this story wasn't going to be mine. It would be Grandma Ruth's the very next morning. The garden felt heavier after that invoice landed. The sweet tea in the pitchers no longer looked refreshing. The laughter from the cousins had faded into awkward murmurs. I sat there quietly, letting the weight of Marlene's words settle over everyone like morning fog in the mountains. She didn't stop at sending the message. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her legs, and began explaining it out loud as if she were presenting a perfectly reasonable business proposal. "I've carried this burden alone for years," she said, her voice smooth and measured, the same tone she uses when closing a big real estate deal. "Prenatal care, sleepless nights, giving up my own opportunities, and for what? A daughter who walked away from a good education to play with flowers and take care of an elderly woman instead of building her own life." Aunt Carla shifted uncomfortably. Uncle Marcus kept his eyes on the grill, but I could see his jaw tighten. Connor, my half-brother, looked down at his phone, scrolling through the invoice again as if trying to make sense of it. Marlene had spent weeks preparing the ground for this moment. The subtle jabs in the family group chat, the phone calls to various relatives where she painted herself as the exhausted, selfless mother and me as the distant, ungrateful child. She was strategic, always had been. She knew exactly how to frame the story so that questioning her meant questioning the entire family's version of events. I didn't interrupt her. I let her talk, because the more she spoke, the clearer the contradictions became for those who were really listening. She went on about the sacrifices, the school activities she supposedly drove me to, the emotional support she provided during my difficult teenage years, the college funds she wasted when I dropped out. Every number on that invoice was inflated, twisted, and most importantly, included the 6 years she had been completely absent. I could feel Ruth's steady presence beside me. She hadn't said a word yet. Her hand rested lightly on my arm, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone in this. As Marlene continued her performance, I thought about the real cost, not the dollars she invented, but the emotional price Ruth had paid, the nights she stayed up with me when I had nightmares. The way she stretched her limited pension to buy me clothes and school supplies. The quiet strength it took for a woman in her 50s to raise a baby she never asked for. Marlene's voice rose slightly as she addressed the whole table. I'm not asking for luxury. I'm simply asking for what's fair. Elena has built a successful business now. She can afford to show some appreciation for everything I gave up. That was the moment the group chat started exploding. Relatives who weren't even at the gathering began replying. Some sent shocked emojis. Others asked questions. A few, the ones Marlene had been priming for weeks, started agreeing with her. She's right, one cousin wrote. Family should help each other. I finally looked up and met Marlene's eyes. There was a glint of satisfaction there, like she had finally cornered me in front of everyone. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. About forcing me to publicly admit I was the failure she had always claimed I was. About using this Mother's Day gathering as her stage. She had timed it perfectly. A day when emotions run high, when people expect gratitude and harmony. Who argues with their mother on Mother's Day in front of the entire family? But here's what she didn't understand. I had stopped playing by her rules years ago. I picked up my phone again, opened the group chat, and attached the photograph I had chosen earlier, the one from 1994. Me at 2 years old in Ruth's arms on this very porch. The mountains in the background, the love visible in every pixel. Underneath it, I typed a simple caption. Happy Mother's Day to the woman who actually raised me, the one who showed up when it mattered most. I hit send. The phones buzzed again, this time louder, more insistent. People leaned over their screens, gasps, whispered questions, heads turning from me to Marlene to Ruth. Marlene's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered. That's cute, Elena, but one old photo doesn't change the fact that I gave birth to you. I came back. I finished raising you. Her voice was still confident, but I could hear the first tiny crack in it. Ruth remained quiet, but I felt her hand squeeze mine once more, firmer this time. A signal. She was there, she had seen everything. And she had kept records, just like the careful bookkeeper she had been her whole working life. The family was starting to shift, not dramatically but noticeably. The murmurs grew. Questions began floating in the group chat from relatives in other cities who were now reading the exchange in real time. This was only the opening move. Marlene had no idea that the real reckoning wasn't coming from me. It was coming from the woman who had actually held me through those missing years. And it would arrive the very next morning. The garden, which had always felt like a sanctuary, suddenly felt smaller. The string lights I had helped install now cast long shadows across faces that were no longer relaxed. People stared at their phones, rereading the invoice as if the numbers might change if they looked hard enough. The lemon blueberry cake I had brought sat untouched in the center of the table. Marlene leaned forward slightly, her posture elegant and composed, as if she were facilitating a family meeting rather than dropping an emotional bomb. I've been carrying this weight for 34 years, she continued, her voice steady and practiced. The late nights, the doctor visits, the sacrifices I made so Elena could have opportunities I never did. And what do I have to show for it? A daughter who left college, moved back to the mountains, and barely makes time for her own mother. Aunt Carla set her glass of sweet tea down slowly. She glanced at me, then at Ruth, then back at Marlene. Uncle Marcus turned off the grill and wiped his hands on a towel, his expression unreadable but his silence heavy. Connor shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable for the first time all afternoon. The group chat was alive now. Messages poured in from relatives who weren't physically present, cousins in Raleigh, an uncle in Atlanta, even great aunts who rarely spoke up. Some were confused. Others were already siding with Marlene. Family helps family, one wrote. Elena, you've done well with your business. Maybe it's time to show some gratitude. I sat quietly, breathing through the familiar sting. This wasn't new. I had heard variations of this narrative my entire adult life. But hearing it laid out so coldly in black and white with a dollar amount attached in front of 52 people hit differently. Marlene wasn't yelling, that wasn't her style. She was calm, reasonable, even a little sad, the perfect performance of a mother who had given everything and received nothing. She pointed out specific line items on the invoice, explaining them as if she were teaching a financial literacy class. The ages 0 to 6, she said, tapping her phone screen. Those were the most demanding years. I was young, figuring out life on my own, but I still made sure you were taken care of. That was the line that almost made me speak up immediately, because those were the years she had left me entirely, the years Ruth had fed me, clothed me, loved me when Marlene chose a different path. But I held back. I wanted to see how far she would go. I wanted the family to hear it from her own mouth. Ruth sat beside me like a quiet mountain, unmoving, observant, her presence more powerful than any words. She hadn't touched her phone. She didn't need to. She had lived the truth. Some relatives began murmuring in agreement with Marlene. A cousin I rarely spoke to nodded sympathetically. "It must have been so hard, Aunt Marlene." Another added, "Elena, you really should consider what your mom has done for you." The pity in their eyes was almost worse than the judgment. They saw me as the troubled daughter who had never appreciated her mother's sacrifices. They didn't see the late-night drives I made to check on Ruth after her stroke. They didn't see the checks I sent quietly for her medications and home repairs. They didn't see the woman who had actually raised me sitting right there, calm and dignified. Marlene's eyes met mine across the table. There was a challenge in them, a quiet demand for me to either pay up or publicly submit to her version of our story. This wasn't just about money for her. It was about validation, about forcing the family to reaffirm that she had been the hero all along, about securing financial help for Connor's future without having to ask directly. I could feel the tension building in my chest, but I kept my breathing steady. Years of learning to respond instead of react served me well in that moment. I knew that exploding would only make me look like the unstable one. Crying would make me look weak, so I chose something far more powerful. Stillness. I let her finish her explanation. I let the group chat fill with more comments. And then, when the moment felt right, I simply picked up my phone again and made sure the photograph I had sent earlier was prominently displayed at the top of the thread. The one of Ruth holding 2-year-old me on the porch. The reactions shifted almost immediately. More questions appeared. "Wait, is that Grandma Ruth? When was this taken? Marlene, where were you in this picture?" Marlene's smile tightened. "It was a temporary arrangement," she said quickly. "I was getting my life together so I could provide a better future." But the seed of doubt had been planted. The family was starting to look at Ruth differently, starting to do the math in their heads, starting to remember things they had conveniently forgotten or never been told. The invoice had been meant to humiliate me and pressure me into compliance. Instead, it was beginning to expose the cracks in a story Marlene had told for decades. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth has a way of surfacing when given even the smallest opening. But what happened next, the way the family's eyes began turning toward Grandma Ruth with new understanding, set the stage for something much bigger the following day. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't even stand up from my chair. Instead, I let the silence do most of the talking after the photograph landed in the group chat. The image of Ruth holding me on that porch, both of us smiling, mountains in the background, dated clearly in her careful handwriting, sat at the top of the thread like a quiet witness that couldn't be argued with. Phones kept buzzing as more relatives opened it. I watched the reactions ripple across the garden. Some cousins zoomed in on the date, others glanced quickly at Marlene, then at Ruth, doing the mental math. The 6 years that Marlene had just billed me $68,000 for suddenly didn't add up the way she claimed. Marlene recovered quickly, the way she always does. She let out a soft, almost pitying laugh. "Elena, honey, that's a sweet photo, but it doesn't change reality. I was working hard to build a stable life for us. Temporary help from family is normal. You make it sound like I abandoned you." Her tone was gentle on the surface, but I heard the edge underneath, the warning not to push this further in front of everyone. She turned to the table, addressing them like a seasoned mediator. "I came back when I was ready. I enrolled her in school. I supported her through the difficult years. One old picture doesn't erase 34 years of motherhood." I nodded slowly, keeping my voice even and low, the way Ruth had taught me to speak when emotions run high. "You're right about one thing, Mom," I said calmly. "One picture doesn't erase 34 years, but it does show the truth about the first 6. The years you billed me for, the ones you said you sacrificed everything for, were the years Grandma Ruth stayed up with me through fevers, taught me how to read, and made sure I never felt unwanted." The words came out steady, without accusation, just clarity. I wasn't attacking her. I was simply stating facts that had been buried for decades. Aunt Carla spoke up first, her voice hesitant. "Marlene, that photo was taken here when Elena was 2. Ruth nodded once, simply. She still hadn't said much, but her presence filled the space more than any words could. Marlene's fingers tightened around her wine glass. "It was temporary. I was young. I needed time to get established. Every mother makes hard choices." I looked at her directly. "I'm not denying you came back, but you don't get to charge me for the years you weren't here. Those years belong to Grandma. She earned every single one of them." The group chat continued to light up. Relatives who had been agreeing with Marlene moments earlier were now sending private messages to me or asking questions in the main thread. Wait, I thought Marlene raised you from birth? This photo is from 1994. The narrative was cracking, slowly but visibly. Connor looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. He had grown up hearing only Marlene's version. This was new information for him, too. I didn't push harder. I didn't list every memory or pull out more evidence. That wasn't the point. The point was to stop carrying the lie alone, to let the truth breathe in the open air for once. Ruth squeezed my hand under the table. Her grip was warm and steady, the same grip that had held me through childhood storms. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude for her. Not just for raising me, but for showing me what quiet strength looks like. Marlene stood up slowly, smoothing her blouse. This isn't the time or place for this conversation. It's Mother's Day. I was hoping for appreciation, not an ambush. She said it with such practiced hurt that a few relatives nodded sympathetically, but others didn't. The seed of doubt had taken root. I remained seated. I didn't ambush anyone, I said softly. I simply answered the invoice you sent to 52 people. The garden fell into a tense quiet again. The hummingbirds had disappeared. Even the creek seemed to murmur more softly in the background. I knew this wasn't over. Marlene wouldn't let it end here. She needed control. She needed the family to reaffirm her story, but something had shifted in the air, something irreversible. That night, as I helped Ruth clear the table after everyone left, she looked at me with those clear, wise eyes and said, "You did good, baby. But tomorrow I have something to show them, too." I didn't ask what it was. I just hugged her and felt grateful that the woman who had raised me still had strength left to stand beside me. The real shift, the one that would change everything, came the next morning when Grandma Ruth called the family back together. Not through the group chat. Not with drama. Just one quiet phone call at a time, the old-fashioned way she had always done things. And what she brought out changed the story forever. The next morning arrived with that soft mountain light filtering through the trees around Ruth's house. I woke up early the way I always do and drove over with fresh coffee and some pastries from the local bakery. Ruth had called a small gathering, not the whole 52 people, but the immediate family and a few key relatives who had been at the cookout. She said it was important. She didn't raise her voice or make it sound urgent. She simply said, "Come to the house at 3. I have something to show everyone." When I arrived, the porch was already filling up. Aunt Carla, Uncle Marcus, Connor, a couple of cousins, and a few others. Marlene was noticeably absent. She had left early the night before and hadn't responded to Ruth's call. Ruth sat at the head of the old wooden table, looking smaller in the daylight but somehow even more solid. The faded denim apron was gone. Instead, she wore a simple light blue blouse, her silver hair neatly braided. In front of her sat an old shoebox, the kind people keep important papers in. It was worn at the corners, held together with a thick rubber band. I took a seat beside her. The air felt different today, quieter, more serious, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Ruth didn't waste time with small talk. She looked around at each of us with those clear, steady eyes that had seen decades of family stories. "Yesterday," she began, her voice calm but carrying easily across the porch, "Marlene sent a bill to all of you. She charged Elena for raising her, including the first 6 years of her life." She paused, letting that sink in. "Those 6 years I have kept every record, because that's who I am. I was a bookkeeper for 40 years. I keep things straight." She removed the rubber band and opened the shoebox. Inside were stacks of old photographs, a small leather ledger, and several folded letters. She pulled out the same photograph I had sent, the one of her holding 2-year-old me, and placed it gently on the table. But she didn't stop there. She picked up another photo. This one showed me at age 4, sitting on Ruth's lap in the garden, both of us covered in dirt from planting flowers. Then another, me at 5, blowing out birthday candles with Ruth behind me, no Marlene in sight. Each image was dated carefully on the back in Ruth's precise handwriting. The family leaned in. The cracks in Marlene's story were widening with every photo. Ruth spoke without anger, just quiet truth. "When Elena was 4 months old, Marlene left her on my porch with this note." She unfolded a yellowed piece of notebook paper. The handwriting was unmistakably Marlene's, small, slanted, hurried. Ruth read 3 lines aloud, her voice steady. "Mom, I can't do this right now. She's too much for me. Please take her. I'll come back when I'm ready." She set the letter down so everyone could see it. The word failure was scribbled in the margin twice, once next to my name. The porch went completely silent. Connor stared at the letter, his face pale. Aunt Carla covered her mouth with her hand. Even the cousins who had been supportive of Marlene the day before looked stunned. Ruth continued gently. I didn't keep these things to hurt my daughter. I kept them because I hoped one day Marlene would tell the truth herself. But yesterday she chose to send that bill. She chose to call Elena a disappointment and a financial failure in front of the whole family. So today I'm choosing the truth. She opened the leather ledger, columns of dates, small amounts, and notes in her bookkeeper's hand. For the last 12 years, Ruth said, I have quietly helped Marlene financially. Car repairs, medical bills, help with Connor's tuition, support when her real estate deals fell through. She asked me not to tell anyone. The total is over $48,000, money from my pension, money I gave freely because she is my daughter. She closed the book softly. But I will not let her charge Elena for the love I gave freely. I will not let her rewrite history while Elena has been the one quietly taking care of me these past years. I felt tears welling up but blinked them back. Ruth had never spoken about the money she gave Marlene. She had carried that burden in silence, just like she had carried me. The family began talking all at once. Questions, memories surfacing, pieces falling into place, old stories from the 90s that people had forgotten or never fully understood suddenly made sense. Marlene's carefully built narrative was fracturing right in front of us. But Ruth wasn't finished. She looked at each person and said, I love my daughter, but love doesn't mean protecting her from the truth anymore, not when it hurts my granddaughter. In that moment, watching my 83-year-old grandmother stand up for me with such quiet dignity, something inside me healed a little deeper. This wasn't about revenge. This was about finally setting the record straight. The first cracks had appeared, and they were only going to grow wider. Ruth wasn't in a hurry. She let the family sit with the letter and the photographs for a few long moments. The yellowed paper with Marlene's handwriting lay open on the table like undeniable evidence in a quiet courtroom. The word failure written in the margins stared back at all of us. She reached deeper into the shoebox and pulled out more items, hospital receipts from my birth that listed Ruth's address as the residence, not Marlene's. Handwritten notes from Marlene during those 6 years, short messages sent from different cities, promising she'd be back soon but never following through. One birthday card Marlene sent when I turned 3 that simply said, thinking of you, with no return address. Each piece of paper was another quiet nail in the coffin of the story Marlene had told for decades. I didn't want it to come to this, Ruth said, her voice still calm and measured, carrying the same steady tone she used when balancing ledgers all those years. For 30 years I kept quiet. I told myself a mother's mistakes don't need to be aired in public, but when Marlene stood in my garden yesterday and called my granddaughter a costly disappointment when she tried to charge her for the years I poured my life into, I knew the time for silence was over. She turned to me, her eyes soft but strong. Elena, you have never been a disappointment, not to me. You are the greatest blessing of my later years. The way you left school to care for me after my stroke, the way you built your business from nothing, the way you've quietly supported me without ever asking for credit, that is who you are. I reached over and held her hand. For the first time that day, I let a few tears fall, not from sadness, but from the deep relief of finally being seen so completely by the woman who mattered most. Connor spoke up, his voice cracking slightly. Mom never told me any of this. She always said she raised Elena mostly on her own, that Elena was difficult and ungrateful. Ruth nodded gently. Your mother is very good at telling the story she needs people to believe, but the records don't lie, the photographs don't lie, and the love I gave Elena was never a burden, it was a gift. Aunt Carla wiped her eyes. I remember those years. I believed Marlene when she said it was temporary and she had everything under control. I should have asked more questions. One by one, the family members began sharing fragments of memories they had pushed aside, stories of seeing me with Ruth at holidays while Marlene was traveling for work, comments about how attached I was to my grandmother, pieces that suddenly fit together differently now. Ruth closed the shoebox but left the most important items displayed on the table. I'm not asking any of you to choose sides, she said. I'm asking you to know the truth. Elena owes Marlene nothing for those early years. If anything, I owe Elena for the joy she brought into my life when I thought my best years were behind me. She looked around the porch one more time. And to Marlene, if these words reach you, I love you. You will always be my daughter. But I will no longer protect you from the consequences of your choices. No more money, no more covering for the past. The lying stops here. The weight of her words settled over all of us. This wasn't dramatic yelling or dramatic tears. This was an 83-year-old woman drawing a clear, loving, but firm boundary. And it carried more power than any shouting match ever could. As the gathering began to wind down, the group chat, which had been relatively quiet that morning, started lighting up again. People who had received summaries from those present were reacting. More relatives were beginning to see the full picture. Several who had defended Marlene the day before were now sending me private messages of support and apology. Marlene had lost control of the narrative, and she knew it. That afternoon, as I sat with Ruth on the porch after everyone left, she turned to me and smiled, tired but peaceful. "I didn't open that box to destroy your mother," she said. "I opened it to free you. You've carried her version of your story long enough, baby." In that moment, sitting beside the woman who had truly raised me, I felt something heavy finally lift from my shoulders. The truth had come out, not with rage but with quiet, undeniable clarity. The family would never look at our history the same way again. The days following Grandma Ruth's gathering unfolded slowly, like the mountain mist lifting at dawn. There was no explosive fight, no screaming matches. Just a quiet, steady unraveling of the story Marlene had built for over 30 years. By evening, the family group chat had transformed. People who had defended Marlene the day before were now sending messages of support to me and Ruth. Some shared their own memories that suddenly made sense. Others simply said they were sorry for not seeing the full picture sooner. One by one, relatives began leaving the original group chat or muting Marlene entirely. Within 48 hours, 51 people had either blocked her or stepped back completely. The 52nd person, Ruth, never blocked her daughter. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She drew a clear, loving boundary. Marlene tried to call Ruth multiple times that week. Ruth answered only once. She spoke with the same calm dignity she had shown on the porch. She told Marlene she loved her, but the financial support was over. The covering for the past was over. And until Marlene could speak the truth openly to her children and the family, she would not be welcome in the mountain house. It wasn't said with cruelty, it was said with finality. The consequences came gradually but unmistakably. Marlene lost her seat on the church's planning committee, a quiet but significant fall from grace in her social circle. 2 major real estate clients who had heard the story through mutual connections pulled their listings. Word travels slowly but thoroughly in these communities. Connor reached out to me a few days later. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Asheville. He looked exhausted, like someone who had just learned his entire childhood narrative had missing chapters. He apologized for the things he had said and believed without questioning. We didn't become instant best friends, but we started a tentative, honest conversation, the first real one we'd ever had. "Brooke, wait, in our story it's Connor, but the half-sibling dynamic remained. He admitted Marlene had been struggling financially more than she let on. The invoice wasn't just about resentment. It was also about desperation to fund his MBA program and maintain the lifestyle she had grown used to." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired but also lighter. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of her version of me. My own life continued with its steady rhythm. I returned to Harper & Bloom, designing a beautiful mountain elopement and a corporate retreat. The work felt more meaningful now. Every arrangement I created carried a piece of Ruth's teaching, turning simple, ordinary things into something beautiful and lasting. Ruth and I spent more quiet evenings on the porch. We didn't rehash the drama. We talked about the garden, about future plans for the studio, about the new greenhouse we were going to build together. She never once said, "I told you so." She simply sat with me, her presence a constant reminder that real love doesn't keep score. Marlene eventually started therapy. I heard through Connor that she had cried through several sessions. She sent me one short message a couple of weeks later. No apology, not yet. Just a simple, "I saw the photos, I remember now." It wasn't enough, but it was the first crack in her armor. I didn't respond immediately. I was still processing, still protecting my peace. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors with clear handles. I would open mine again when, and if, the relationship could be built on honesty. The family gatherings grew smaller but more authentic. People who showed up did so because they wanted to, not because of obligation or guilt. The mountain house felt lighter, as if truth itself had cleared the air. Through it all, I kept coming back to one simple realization. I was never the disappointment Marlene tried to bill me as. I was the result of a grandmother's quiet, extraordinary love, the kind that doesn't ask for repayment. And that truth was finally free. The healing didn't happen overnight. It came in small, gentle moments, the kind Ruth always taught me to notice. 2 weeks after the gathering, I posted a single photo on my personal social media. It was Ruth and me on the porch at sunset, her arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling softly. No dramatic caption, just, "The woman who actually raised me, grateful every single day." Marlene saw it. She liked the photo. No comment, but that small heart tap felt like the first honest acknowledgement in years. Connor and I have started talking more. Real conversations, not about blame but about understanding. He's beginning to set his own boundaries with Marlene, and I'm proud of him for that. We're not close yet, but we're no longer strangers carrying the same heavy story. As for me, I've learned that boundaries aren't acts of anger. They're acts of self-respect. I still love my mother in the complicated way you can love someone who hurt you deeply. But love no longer means letting her rewrite my worth. I've stopped explaining myself. I've stopped waiting for her to see me clearly. That freedom feels like the mountains after a long rain, clear, open, and full of possibility. Ruth and I spend most Sundays together now. We work in the garden, bake the lemon blueberry cake, and talk about everything and nothing. She's teaching me more about patience and legacy. Last month, we broke ground on the new greenhouse I'm building for her. Every nail and pane of glass is a quiet thank you for the years she gave me without ever sending a bill. Harper and Bloom is thriving. We just landed a beautiful fall wedding series at a historic mountain estate, but more importantly, the work feels lighter now. I create spaces for people to celebrate love without carrying the weight of old family lies. To anyone watching who has walked a similar road, the scapegoat, the disappointment, the one who had to earn love that should have been freely given, I see you. Drop the word healing in the comments if this story touched something deep inside you. You don't have to carry their version anymore. This experience taught me that the most powerful responses are often the quietest ones. A single photograph, a shoebox full of truth, an 83-year-old woman's calm, unwavering voice. Sometimes that's all it takes to break a cycle that has lasted decades. I'm no longer the little girl waiting to be wanted. I'm a woman who knows exactly who raised her, who she has become, and who she chooses to be. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. If it helped you feel less alone, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, your truth is worth protecting. Until next time, take care of yourself and protect your peace.